The grand hall of the Chandon Conservatory was a kingdom of quiet elegance during the day, a place of hushed conversations and the precise, repeating scales of student practice. But at 6 o'clock in the evening, after the last aspiring musician had packed their sheet music and the final professor had clicked the lock on their office door, a different shift began. The echoing space, with its high, painted ceiling and rows of empty velvet seats, belonged to cleaners. Among them was a woman named Maria, who moved with a steady, efficient grace. Her hands, wrapped in soft cotton gloves, knew every surface. They knew the exact pressure to apply to the grand piano's polished lid to make it shine without leaving a streak. They knew the tricky corner of the third balcony stair where dust liked to hide. Her world was one of quiet order, of returning the splendid room to a state of perfect readiness for the next day's artistry, and always following a few steps behind with a dustpan and brush, or carefully refilling the glass polish bottles, was her daughter. The girl, 16, was a shadow in her mother's wake, but her eyes were everywhere. While her hands performed their small, familiar tasks, her attention was captured by the kingdom of sound that existed only in memory here. She didn't just see a floor to be swept. She saw the path a cellist's chair legs made on the polished wood. She didn't just see a forgotten water glass on a stand. She imagined the flautist who had left it there, mid-rehearsal. And in the center of it all, sitting on the wide, empty stage like a sleeping beast, was the piano dot. It wasn't just any piano. It was a Steinway concert grand, a creature of dark, mirrored wood and graceful, curving legs. To the girl, it was the heart of the hall. During the day, she had heard it from the service corridors. Sometimes it wept under the fingers of an advanced student, a sad, beautiful piece that made her throat feel tight. Sometimes it thundered, a powerful, angry sound that vibrated in her chest. She had heard a famous guest pianist once, through a cracked door, and the music had been so complex and so fluid it sounded like magic, like turning sunlight into sound. She had never touched it. That was an unspoken rule, as solid as the marble walls. Her mother had said it gently, but firmly on her first day, helping out. That is not for us, Mia. Our job is to care for the space around it. The music belongs to them. Them. The students with their leather music bags, the teachers in their smart jackets, the visitors who bought tickets to sit in the velvet chairs. People who belong to the world of the piano, not the world of the cleaning cart. So she observed. She learned its schedule. The head custodian, a kind man with tired eyes, would cover it with a fitted, padded cloth every night after her mother had dusted it. She watched the way the light from the crystal chandelier caught on its lid. She had, once, when absolutely no one was around, crept close enough to see the perfect, creamy white of the ivory keys and the deep black of the sharps and flats. They looked like a river of possibility. Her own world of music was silent and secret. At home, in their small apartment, where the sound of the neighbor's television always drifted through the walls, she had an old tablet. The screen was cracked in one corner, and it was slow, but on it was a piano app. The keys were flat rectangles on the glass, and the sound that came from the tiny speaker was thin and tinny, nothing like the rich, round tones of the Steinway. But it was a map. She had taught herself note by painful note, using tutorials she found online for free, her headphones plugged in so as not to disturb her mother after a long day. She also collected scraps of music. When the recycling bins were emptied in the practice rooms, she would sometimes rescue a page that had been crumpled and tossed away. A page of batch exercises, a fragment of a Beethoven sonata. She would smooth them out on her bed at home, her fingers tracing the mysterious black dots and lines, trying to connect what she saw to the sounds she had heard in the hall. It was a puzzle, and she was piecing it together alone. In the quiet dot in the hall, her invisibility was both a shield and a cage. The early evening students, rushing in for last-minute practice, looked right through her. A professor giving a late lesson would gesture for her to wait outside the door until he finished his point. She was part of the scenery, as movable as a chair. It didn't make her angry, not exactly. It just felt like a fact of life, like the color of the sky. She was there to clean, not to create, but her mind was always creating. As she wiped down the handrail of the balcony, she would imagine the feeling of walking onto that stage, not with a broom, but to sit at the bench. As she vacuumed the intricate patterns of the carpet, the hum of the machine became, in her imagination, the low murmur of an audience waiting. She had memorized the acoustics of the room, how a cough from the back corner sounded, how a single clear note from the stage seemed to hang in the air for a second before fading. She knew this hall in a way the performers might not. She knew its silences. One Thursday, things were different. There was a big donor event scheduled for the next evening. Her mother had been asked to do a special detailed cleaning. The stage was cleared. The piano was center stage without its usual protective cover, looking more magnificent and exposed than ever. They worked later than usual, and the hall was deeply, profoundly quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy and full of potential. "I have to go to the basement storeroom," her mother said, wiping her forehead. "The special brass polish for the plaque by the door is down there. It will take me 10 minutes. Stay here, okay? Just look busy if anyone comes." But no one will. Her mother gave her a tired smile and disappeared through the service door. The girl was alone, truly alone for the first time in the grand hall. The only light came from the emergency exits and the soft, dim glow of the outside streetlights filtering through the tall windows. The great room was bathed in shadows, the rows of seats like a sleeping audience. Her eyes went, as they always did, to the piano. It seemed to glow in the semi-darkness. The rule echoed in her head, "That is not for us." But here, now, with the world outside and the hall holding its breath, the rule felt very far away. This was her chance. Not to play for anyone, not to prove anything. Just to know once what it felt like to connect her secret, silent world with the real, physical source of the sound she loved. Her heart began to beat a hard, fast rhythm against her ribs. The polished floor felt miles long as she took one step, then another, away from the safe, dark corner by the cleaning cart, and toward the waiting stage. The silence in the hall was different now. Before, with her mother moving around, it had been a working silence, comfortable and familiar. Now it was a deep, waiting silence. It seemed to press in from the high ceiling and the dark corners of the balconies. The only sound was the soft, quick rhythm of her own breathing, which felt too loud in the empty space. She stood at the edge of the stage, looking up at the piano. From this close, it was enormous. It wasn't just a thing to be dusted. It was a presence. The black wood wasn't just polished. It was like a dark lake, perfectly still, reflecting the dim shapes of the windows. She could see the blurry outline of herself in it, a small, pale figure in simple clothes, holding very still. Her mother's voice was a clear echo in her mind. Asterisk, that is not for us. Our job is to care for the space around it. Asterisk, she could almost hear the soft rustle of her mother's cleaning cloth, the squeak of the cart's wheel. If she touched it, she would be crossing a line that was there for a good reason. People like them didn't sit at pianos like this. They kept the world around it spotless, so that the people who did belong could make their magic without any distractions. What if she left a fingerprint? What if the bench creaked? What if, by some impossible accident, she pressed a key and it made that terrible, ringing bong that would shatter the quiet and bring someone running? She took a step back, her practical side winning. It was a stupid idea, a risky, childish fantasy. She should go back to the cart, find something to polish, wait for her mother. She turned, ready to retreat to the safety of her role, of being invisible. But then she didn't move. Her feet felt stuck to the floor. She looked over her shoulder. The piano's keyboard lid was open. From here, she could just see the very edge of the keys, a sliver of white in the shadows. She thought of her tablet, with its flat, silent glass. She thought of the cracked speaker and the tiny, fake sound. She thought of all the hours in her room, fingers tapping on a screen, trying to imagine what a real chord would feel like, sound like, vibrate like. This wasn't about playing music, not really. It was about touching a dream. Just once, to know if it was solid. If she could just rest her fingertips on the cool ivory, that would be enough. She wouldn't even press down. Just a touch. A connection. Then she would walk away, and no one would ever know. That small, secret moment would be hers forever. The decision clicked into place, quiet but firm. She walked up the 3 short steps to the stage. The floorboards, solid and old, didn't make a sound. It felt strange to be up here. This was where the musicians stood to bow. This was where the spotlight would be tomorrow night for the donors. She felt like an intruder in a sacred place. She approached the piano from the side, her eyes fixed on the keys. Up close, they were even more beautiful. They weren't just white and black. The white keys had a soft, creamy color like old porcelain. The black keys were made of a dark, smooth wood, not plastic. She could smell it now, a clean, faint scent of wood polish and something else, something older and deeper, like the inside of a forest. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out the heavy piano bench. It made a soft scraping sound on the stage that made her freeze, her heart leaping into her throat. She listened, straining her ears. Nothing. No footsteps, no distant voices. Just the hum of the city, very far away. She sat down. The bench was firm, the leather cool through her thin pants. She was too close. Her knees bumped gently against the underside of the keyboard. She adjusted, sliding back a little. This was how the pianist sat. Straight back, arms relaxed. She had seen it 1,000 times. Now the keyboard stretched out before her, a landscape of possibility. Her hands, which just minutes ago had been holding a dustpan, lay in her lap. They looked ordinary, dry in places from cleaning solutions. A small scratch on the knuckle from moving a practice room chair. These were not a pianist's hands. They were her mother's hands, just younger. She lifted her right hand, her fingers trembling. She held it over the keys, not touching. She aimed for a simple note, a C in the middle. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the shaking. Just a touch, she reminded herself. Just to feel it. Her index finger came down. Feather dash light dot, it wasn't just cool. It was smooth, with the barest hint of a texture, a grain you could only feel if you were completely still. She let her finger rest there, absorbing the feeling. It was real. It was solid. Without meaning to, without even thinking about it, the weight of her arm settled a little more. The key dipped, just a millimeter. The note bloomed in the silent hall dot. It wasn't a bong. It was a single, pure tone. It started right under her finger, a vibration she felt in her bone, and then it flew out into the room. It was rich and round and deep, hanging in the air, filling the space between the floor and the ceiling before slowly, slowly fading away. The sound was so beautiful, so much more alive than anything she had ever heard from her tablet, that it took her breath away. The fear came rushing back, colder now. That was too loud. Someone must have heard. She snatched her hand back, clutching it to her chest, and stared at the key as if it had bitten her. She listened, her whole body rigid. Silence. A deeper silence now, because the ghost of that one perfect note was still there, in her ears, in the wood of the piano, in the air of the hall. It had asked a question. She looked at her hands again. Then she looked at the keys. The one note had been a pebble dropped in a pond. The ripples were pulling her in dot. Maybe just a few notes. A simple scale. Just to hear how they sounded together. That would be it. A scale was practice. It wasn't a song. It was harmless. She placed her right hand in the position she had practiced 1,000 times on the glass screen. Thumb on middle C. She pressed down C, D, E, F, G. The notes rose, clear and bright, each one a little world of sound. Her left hand, acting on its own memory, found the chords that should go underneath. They were clumsy, the fingers not quite landing together. But when they did, the sound was like a warm blanket, wrapping around the higher notes. She wasn't thinking about scales anymore. Her hands, as if they had been waiting for this moment, knew what they wanted to do. They moved from the simple exercise into the beginning of a piece. It was a nocturne by Chopin, one she had listened to on an old recording until she knew every rise and fall, every sigh. She had practiced it on the silent tablet, her fingers memorizing the dance. Now, with the real keys under them, the dance came alive. It was hesitant at first. A wrong note here, a fumbled chord there. But the muscle memory was strong. The sound pulled her forward. She forgot about the hall, about the time, about her mother in the basement. She forgot she was the cleaner's daughter. The only thing that existed was the map of the music in her mind and the incredible, responsive machine under her fingers. She leaned into it. The soft, sorrowful melody began to flow more surely. Her foot, on its own, found the pedal on the floor, pressing it to let the notes blend and sing. The piano was no longer a sleeping beast. It was awake, and it was singing with her for her. The music was no longer something she just listened to. It was something she was having a conversation with. She asked a question with a series of low, soft notes, and the piano answered with a ringing, clear chord from the upper keys. She could feel the vibration coming up through the bench, into her spine. She played on, slipping into a second piece, something by Rachmaninoff she had thought was far too hard for her. But her fingers found the patterns. They stretched for the wide chords. They raced over the runs, not perfectly, not like a professional, but with a raw feeling that came from a place deeper than perfection. It came from all those nights of silent practice, from all those days of watching and dreaming. It was joy and sadness and longing, all pouring out through her fingertips and into the strings of the grand piano. She was so lost in it. In the story, the music was telling that she didn't hear the soft click of the service door opening far at the back of the hall. She didn't see the figure that stepped out and stopped dead, hidden in the deep shadow of the back wall. She didn't know that her audience of one had arrived and was listening, motionless, to the secret concert she thought was for no one but herself. The man who stepped out of the service door was not supposed to be there. He had left hours ago, or thought he had. He was a man of strict routines, of precisely ordered days. His world was one of metronomes and measured tempos, of scales perfected and dynamics carefully notated. He was the director of the conservatory, a man known for his sharp ears and his even sharper critiques. Students practiced for months, hoping for a nod of approval from him, which was rare as a sunny day in winter. He had driven halfway home, his mind already on the next day's important donor event, when a cold knot formed in his stomach. His scorebook, the leather-bound one with all his personal notes for the welcoming speech and the showcase performances. He had left it on the shelf behind his office door. He couldn't do tomorrow without it. With a sigh of irritation at his own forgetfulness, he turned his car around. He entered the building through the staff entrance, his footsteps echoing in the empty service corridor. The main hall would be dark, he knew. The cleaners would be finishing up. He would slip into his office, grab the book, and leave. A 2-minute task, but as he pushed the heavy door open to the back of the grand hall, a sound stopped him cold. It was music. Piano music. Not the careful, practiced repetition of a student grinding through a difficult passage. This was different. It was fluid, full of feeling, but with a rough, untamed edge to it. It was passionate, almost urgent. And it was coming from the stage. His first feeling was one of pure, professional annoyance. A student had stayed late, had disobeyed the rules about practice hours, and was now hogging the concert grand without permission. This was unacceptable. He prepared to step forward, to clear his throat with the authoritative sound that could make a first-year violinist drop their bow. But he didn't move. Something in the music held him back. He stood in the deep shadows by the door, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He could see the outline of someone at the piano. The playing was not technically perfect. There were moments where the rhythm hesitated, a chord that was slightly muddled, a run that wasn't crystal clear. A student at this level should have ironed those out. Yet, the feeling behind the notes, it was undeniable. It wasn't just playing. It was speaking. The music swelled with a longing so deep it felt physical, an ache that filled the hall. Then it would fall to a whisper, a secret being told only to the shadows. Who was this? He knew the playing of all his advanced students. This wasn't any of them. This was a different voice. A raw, undiscovered voice. He took a silent step closer, staying behind a last row of plush seats. The figure at the piano became clearer. It wasn't the silhouette of any student he recognized. The posture was different. The clothes were simple, dark. And then, as the person leaned into a powerful left-hand passage, the dim light from a street lamp outside caught their face for just a second. It was the girl, the cleaner's daughter, the quiet one who always looked at the floor, who trailed behind her mother with the cleaning supplies. The director's breath caught in his throat. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a shock so complete it felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. His mind raced, rejecting the information. It was impossible. A trick of the light. But his ears didn't lie. The music continued to pour forth, a complex romantic piece that even some of his third years struggled with. And she was not just playing the notes. She was living them. He saw her head tilt, listening to the echo of a phrase, as if in conversation with the instrument. He saw her shoulders move with the breath of the music. For a man who had spent his life in pursuit of polished, flawless performance, this was chaos. This was a rule book being torn up in front of him. The boundaries of his world cleaners here, musicians there blurred, and then shattered. The hall, his hall, was being filled with the most genuine sound he had heard in years, and it was coming from someone he had never truly seen. He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. To stop this now would feel like a crime. He stood, rooted to the spot, a prisoner of the beauty he was witnessing. He listened, really listened, not as a critic, but as a man reminded of why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about the perfection. It was about the heart. And this music had a heart that was wild and brave and true. Across the hall, another person had stopped to listen. The night janitor, an older man with a kind, wrinkled face, had been mopping the marble floor of the main foyer. He heard the music drifting through the closed doors. He loved music, though he knew nothing about it technically. He liked the melodies that made him think of his hometown, songs that told stories. This music told a story, a sad one, but with moments of great hope. He quietly pushed the door, opened a crack, and peeked in. He saw the director standing like a statue in the shadows. He saw the girl on stage, lost in her playing. He understood the scene instantly, a secret. A beautiful, fragile secret. He didn't go in. He just leaned on his mop, his head tilted, letting the sound wash over him. It made him think of his own daughter, far away. It made his eyes grow a little wet. Up on the stage, the girl was in another world. The initial fear was gone, burned away by the heat of the music. She moved from the Rachmaninoff into something else, something she had made up in her head during long bus rides. It was a melody that had always been there, a tune of her own. It was simpler than the classical pieces, but somehow more personal. It soared and dipped, a bird learning to fly. She played with her eyes closed now, trusting her hands, feeling the vibration of the piano travel through the bench and into her very core. She was no longer the cleaner's daughter. She wasn't a student, or a guest, or an intruder. She was simply a channel for the song inside her, finally set free. She didn't know she was crying until a tear slipped down her cheek and landed on the back of her hand as it flew over the keys. They were tears of release, of a pressure valve being opened after years of being tightly closed. This was what it felt like. This was the thing she had dreamed of. The grand piano wasn't a distant king. It was her friend, her partner, singing her soul back to her. The final piece she played was the Chopin Nocturne again, but differently now. It wasn't hesitant. It was a goodbye, a sweet, sorrowful farewell to this stolen moment. She played the last, lingering chord, her foot holding the pedal down, letting the sound blend and shimmer and slowly fade into nothing. Silence returned, but it was a new kind of silence. It was a silence that was full. It hummed with the memory of the music, like the air after a thunderstorm. She let her hands fall gently into her lap. They were trembling, but with a good tiredness, like after a long run. She took a deep, shaky breath and opened her eyes. The reality of the dark hall, the lateness of the hour, came crashing back. The spell was broken. Panic, quick and cold, darted through her. Her mother. The 10 minutes had surely passed. She had to go. She had to get back to the cart before anyone saw. She stood up quickly, her legs feeling wobbly. She pushed the bench back under the piano with a soft scrape. She gave the keys one last, longing look, then turned to hurry off the stage. And that's when she saw him, a tall figure, standing in the aisle at the back of the hall. Watching her, her heart stopped. Then it slammed against her ribs, a frantic drum of pure terror. It was over. She was caught. The director himself had seen her. She froze, unable to breathe, unable to move, waiting for the angry shout, the demand to know what she thought she was doing. But the shout didn't come. The figure just stood there. Then, very slowly, he lifted his hands and brought them together. The sound of a single pair of hands clapping in the vast, quiet hall was the most startling sound she had ever heard. It was clear, deliberate, and it echoed off the walls. It was applause. The single, echoing clap seemed to hang in the air longer than the last note of the piano had. To the girl, it was not a sound of celebration. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. Her whole body went cold. The warmth and freedom she had felt just seconds ago vanished, replaced by a dread that made her stomach churn. She stood on the stage, paralyzed, staring at the tall, shadowy figure at the back of the hall. Her mind was a frantic, buzzing blank. All she could think was, asterisk the director. He saw everything. He heard everything. Asterisk the rules she had broken lined up in her head, one after another, each one worse than the last. Touching the piano, playing it, wasting his time, disrespecting the instrument. She thought of her mother, still down in the basement storeroom, completely unaware that her daughter had just thrown their jobs away for a foolish dream. The figure began to walk down the center aisle. His footsteps were slow, measured, and in the quiet, each one sounded like a clock ticking down to the end. She wanted to run, to dash off the side of the stage and vanish into the service corridors. But her legs felt like they were made of the same heavy wood as the piano. All she could do was watch him approach, her hands clenched into tight, damp fists at her sides dot as he got closer. Stepping into a faint pool of light from a high window, she could see his face. It was stern, serious, but it wasn't twisted in anger like she had expected. He looked thoughtful. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, were fixed on her. She looked down at her shoes, unable to hold his gaze, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. He stopped at the edge of the stage, looking up at her. The distance between them felt like a canyon. He was the king of this world, and she was the trespasser. "That piece," he said finally. His voice was calm, quieter than she'd ever heard it. It wasn't a shout. It was just a statement. "The second one you played, the Rachmaninoff. Where did you learn it?" The question was so unexpected, so completely not what she had prepared for, that it took her a moment to process the words. She had prepared for, "What do you think you're doing?" or "Get out of here immediately." Not a question about the music. Her mouth was dry. She tried to swallow. I listen," she whispered, the words barely making it past her lips. She cleared her throat, forcing herself to speak. "To a recording. On my phone." He was silent for a long moment. She risked a glance up. He was studying her, his head tilted slightly. "You learned that by ear? From a recording?" She nodded, still staring at a spot on the floor near his feet. "And on an app? A piano app? On my tablet?" She felt stupid saying it out loud. It sounded so cheap, so silly compared to the grandeur of the hall and the piano. "An app," he repeated, his tone unreadable. He looked past her, at the piano, as if it could explain this mystery. "How long have you been playing?" "I haven't," she said, the truth tumbling out in her confusion and fear. "I mean, not on a real one. Never. Just in my head and on the tablet." Another long pause. The silence was worse than any shouting. She braced herself for the dismissal, the cold order to fetch her mother so they could both be let go. Instead, he said, "Play the last bit again. The part where the left hand has that descending line, right before the main theme returns." It was such a technical, specific request that it completely threw her. This wasn't about punishment. This was a test, a lesson? She didn't understand. She just stood there, frozen anew. "Go on," he said, his voice still low. "I want to hear it again." Slowly, on trembling legs, she turned and walked back to the piano bench. It felt like walking to the edge of a cliff. She sat down, her back rigid. She placed her shaking hands over the keys. She found the place in the music in her mind, the part he meant. She took a ragged breath and played it. It was messy. Her nerves made her fingers stiff. The beautiful flow from before was gone, replaced by a clumsy, frightened rendition. She hit a wrong note and flinched, stopping. "No, no," he said, but his voice wasn't angry. It was focused. "Don't think about me. Don't think about where you are. Think about the line, the sadness in it. Play it like you did before, like no one was listening." His words were like a key turning in a lock. Like no one was listening. That's how it had been before. She closed her eyes for a second, shutting out the hall, shutting out the tall, intimidating man standing just feet away. She reached for the feeling again, the lonely, yearning feeling of the music. She found the notes, and this time, though her fingers still shook, the feeling came back. The phrase wept out of the piano, beautiful and broken. When she finished the short passage, she let her hands drop and looked at him, waiting. He was nodding slowly, almost to himself. "You have no formal training? No teacher?" She shook her head. And you work here with your mother? She nodded, a fresh wave of shame heating her face. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have touched it. My mother, she didn't know. He held up a hand, stopping her. Your mother, he said. Is she still here? Fear spiked through her again. She's in the basement, getting polish. Please, sir, it was only me. She told me not to. It's my fault. He didn't answer that. Instead, he turned his head slightly, as if listening for something. Then he raised his voice, just a little. Carlos? Are you still out there? The girl jumped as the main hall door, which had been opened just a crack, swung open wider. The old janitor stood there, looking a little sheepish, holding his mop. Yes, maestro, he said softly. You heard? The director asked. The janitor, Carlos, nodded, a small warm smile on his weathered face. I heard. It was very beautiful, maestro. He looked at the girl and gave her a slight, encouraging nod. The director turned back to her. And the finale, he said, his voice dropping back to that thoughtful tone. That last little melody, that was yours, wasn't it? She was so stunned by the janitor's presence and kind words that she could only nod again. The director let out a long, slow breath. He looked from her to the piano, to the janitor in the doorway, and then back to her. His stern expression softened, just around the eyes. It wasn't a smile, not quite. It was the look of a man who has been searching for something in all the usual well-lit places, only to find it shining in a dark corner he had walked past 1,000 times. We spend a fortune, he began, speaking more to himself than to her, on recruiting. We listen to hundreds of children from the best schools, with the best teachers, with pianos in their homes. We look for polish, for technique, for promise. He looked directly at her. And sometimes I think we forget to listen for the music itself, for the thing that cannot be taught. He stepped closer, right up to the edge of the stage. What is your name? He asked. She told him, her voice a whisper. Well, he said. He seemed to be making a decision. Tomorrow night, we have very important people here. People who give money to keep this place running, to buy instruments, to offer scholarships. He paused, letting his words sink in. They will hear our best students. Flawless performances. Perfect technique. He leaned forward slightly. But I want them to hear something else first. I want them to hear why we do this. I want them to hear what music really is, before it gets polished. I want them to hear you. The words didn't make sense. They swirled around her head, but wouldn't land. Asterisk, hear her? At the donor event? In front of everyone? You want, to play? The question was absurd, impossible. Yes, he said simply. That lost piece, your piece, the one you made up, panic of a different kind, now not of being caught, but of being seen. I can't, she breathed. In front of people? I don't play for people. I don't know how. You just did, he said, a hint of something like gentleness in his voice. You played for an audience of this hall, and for Carlos, and for me. And it was the most honest sound I've heard in this room in a very long time. He turned to the janitor. Carlos, please go to the basement storeroom. Find her mother. Bring her here. We have something to discuss. As Carlos nodded and hurried off, the director looked back at the girl, who was still sitting at the piano, looking utterly lost. It's not a punishment, he said, as if reading her mind. It's an invitation. But we must ask your mother. She just stared at the black and white keys, her world, which had just been so beautifully clear in the music, now spinning completely out of control. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her chest. But underneath it, deep down, A tiny, impossible ember of something else had been sparked by his words. It was a feeling so foreign, she barely recognized it. It was hope. The wait for her mother was the longest few minutes of her life. She stayed on the piano bench, her back to the keys, unable to look at the director, who now paced slowly in the aisle, his hands clasped behind his back. The grand hall felt like a different place. It was no longer a secret playground or a trap. It was a courtroom, and her fate was being decided. The beautiful afterglow of the music was completely gone, replaced by a sickening anxiety. What would her mother say? She would be so disappointed, so scared for their jobs. The girl replayed the director's impossible invitation in her head. I want them to hear you. It felt like a cruel joke. Then the service door opened. Her mother walked in, followed by Carlos, the janitor. Her mother's face was tight with worry, her eyes scanning the dark hall until they found her daughter on the stage. She hurried down the aisle, her cleaning shoes making soft, quick scuffs on the polished floor. What is it? What's wrong? Are you hurt? Her mother's voice was full of fear. She barely glanced at the director, her focus entirely on her daughter. Before the girl could stammer an explanation, the director stepped forward. Nothing is wrong, he said, his voice firm but respectful. Your daughter is not in trouble. Quite the opposite. My name is... He introduced himself properly. Her mother turned to him, recognizing him now, her posture becoming defensive, protective. Maestro. Has she done something? If she touched something, I am sorry. She is a good girl, she played, the director interrupted gently. She played the piano, and I heard her. The mother's face went pale. She looked at her daughter, a mix of shock and confusion in her eyes. You played? But you don't, how? She taught herself, the director said. And she has a rare gift. I have asked her to play tomorrow night. For the donors. Before the official program. The words hung in the air. The mother stared at him as if he were speaking a different language. Her mouth opened, then closed. She shook her head slowly. No, that is not possible. She is not. That is for the students, for the important people. She cleans here. We clean here. I understand that, the director said, nodding. But sometimes, talent does not look the way we expect it to look. It does not always come from the places we think it should. What I heard tonight, it is the reason this place exists. To find that spark. I am asking for your permission to let her share that spark. The mother turned back to her daughter. Is this true? You want to do this? To sit up there in front of all those people? The girl found her voice, small and shaky. I'm scared, Mama, but he asked me to play my song. The one from my head. Seeing the fear in her daughter's eyes, but also a faint, desperate longing, changed something in the mother's face. Her own fear softened into a deep, weary understanding. She had seen her daughter hunched over the tablet for years. She had heard the tiny, tinny sounds through the wall. She had never understood it as anything more than a quiet hobby, a way to pass the time. Now this stern, important man was calling it a gift. She looked from her daughter's hopeful, terrified face to the director's serious, expectant one. She was a practical woman. Her life was built on know and cannot, and be careful. But for her daughter, just once, she had to find a way to say yes. She took a deep breath. If she does this, our jobs are completely safe, the director said without hesitation. That is not part of this discussion. This is only about the music. The mother nodded slowly. She reached out and took her daughter's hand, squeezing it tightly. Then, okay, you can try. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next evening, the grand hall was transformed. It was blazing with light from the great chandeliers. The velvet seats were filled with men and women in elegant clothes, their jewelry glittering. There was a low, polite hum of conversation, the clink of glasses from the reception in the foyer. The air smelled of perfume and expectation. Backstage, the girl felt like she was going to be sick. She was wearing a simple dark dress, borrowed from the costume department. It felt strange on her. Her hands were ice cold. The director had given her no instructions, no advice. He had simply said, "When I introduce you, walk out, sit down, and play your melody. Just as you did last night. Forget they are there." Now, standing in the wings, watching the director step up to the microphone on the stage, she knew that was impossible. They were a sea of faces, a wall of eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director's voice echoed through the hall. "Thank you for your generous support of our conservatory. Tonight, you will hear some of our finest students, the future of music. But before we begin our formal program, I would like to offer you a different kind of performance. A reminder of where music begins. Not with perfection, but with feeling. Not with training, but with heart. Please welcome a very special guest." He did not say her name. He simply gestured to the side of the stage. Her legs moved on their own. The walk to the center of the stage felt like crossing a wide, wind-swept plain. The spotlight was hot and blinding. She could see nothing of the audience, just a dark, shapeless void. Her heart was a wild drum in her ears. She reached the piano, its surface gleaming under the lights. She sat on the bench, the leather smooth under her. The sea of faces was still out there, waiting. Judging Dot, she placed her cold hands on the keys. They felt familiar now, and yet totally alien. Her mind went blank. The melody she had played 100 times in her head vanished. Panic rose, bitter in her throat. She was going to freeze. She was going to fail in front of everyone. Then, through the pounding in her ears, she heard a sound. A single, soft, clear note. Dot. It wasn't from the piano. It came from the dark void. Then another. 2 notes held together. It was someone very quietly, humming a gentle, encouraging tune. She couldn't see who, but she knew the voice. It was Carlos, the janitor. He was somewhere in the back, near the doors. And then, from a different direction, a low whisper. "You can do it, Mia." Her mother's voice, barely audible, but she heard it. They were with her. In this terrifying, vast space, she was not alone. She closed her eyes. She stopped trying to see the audience. She stopped trying to be a performer. She thought of the empty hall last night, the streetlight through the windows, the feel of the key under her finger for the very first time. She thought of her small room, and the silent tablet, and the dream that lived inside her. Dot. Her fingers began to move. The first notes were quiet, hesitant, a question. They were the sound of a door opening slowly. Then the left hand came in, a soft, warm chord, like an answer. The melody that emerged was simple. It was not fast or flashy. It was a story. It spoke of quiet rooms and loud dreams. It spoke of watching from the shadows and wishing for the light. It rose, gathering strength, not in volume, but in certainty. It soared into a middle section that was full of a wild, joyful freedom, the sound of fingers finally flying across real keys. Then it fell back, softened into a gentle, sorrowful reflection, before ending on a single high, pure note that seemed to hang in the air, shimmering with hope. When the last sound faded, she kept her eyes closed for a second longer, her hands resting in her lap. The silence was absolute. Then, a WSN single quotes T dotted from the back. A single pair of hands clapping firmly. Carlos. Then another pair near him. Then, from the front row, the director, standing and clapping with a slow, deliberate pride. Then another person stood up, and another. A wave of motion swept through the hall. The applause began not as a polite batter, but as a deep, rolling thunder of sound. It wasn't just for the notes. It was for the story they had just heard. It was for the surprise of it, the honesty of it. The girl opened her eyes, blinking in the light. She saw the director smiling a real, full smile. She saw people on their feet. She saw her mother, standing by the service door, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes streaming with tears, but she was nodding as if to say, Asterisk, I see you now. I understand. Asterisk, the applause washed over her, warm and amazing. It didn't feel like she had conquered the stage. It felt like the stage and the hall and the people in it had opened up and let her in. Just for a moment, she was not the cleaner's daughter. She was not a student or a guest. She was simply the girl who had a song inside and who, for the first time, had been given a chance to let it out. She stood up, her legs still shaky, and took a small, awkward bow. The sound in the room swelled even louder. As she walked off the stage, the applause following her, she knew her life hadn't magically changed. Tomorrow, she would still help her mother. The world was still the same, but she was different. She had touched the dream, and the dream had touched back. And now, hundreds of people had heard it too. That was a secret too big to ever be silent again.